Governor. I am based in the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, CILT, which is tucked inside CHED at UCT. And I have a very wide variety of interests, including online learning design, assessment, and issues around labor and postgraduate education, or in higher education. I'm joined today by two colleagues, Tasneem Jaffer, who's going to be co-presenting. Tass, do you want to say hi? Introduce
yourself.
Hi,
everyone. I'm Tasneem from CILT. I work with Shonali. I'm a learning designer and a project coordinator, so I support staff in developing their course design and development.
Thanks, Tass. So Tass and I wrote a chapter on instructional text for a learning design textbook last year, somehow or the other. That happened during COVID. And so we suddenly thought, we've never shared this with our community locally. So we thought we would bring that to you today. Also joining us in the room today is Maxwell Tummy, who is the magical man who makes sure that we all get to the right place at the right time and does a dozen other things besides. Max, I don't know if you want to say hi or if you are deep in other things.
I'm deep in other things, but good morning, everyone. I hope you guys enjoy the session ahead.
Thanks, Max. Okay, so I think we are fairly close to, I think, getting started. Yeah, 11:05. So I think we should get started. So we're here today, as I said, to chat about instructional text. Welcome to everyone who has joined us today. I imagine that we'll have one or two more people kind of pop into the room just as they get between things. But we're really here to think about a kind of teaching text that often just hides in day-to-day life. So in day-to-day life, we'll often use what we've sort of described as instructional teaching text in order to manage students' behavior in the classroom, in order to direct their attention to particular things. And we can find it in all sorts of places. So you'll find instructional text, as we're talking about it today, in textbooks, you'll find it in learner guides, you'll find it in educator-produced material, like so worksheets or assignment briefs, all those kinds of things. And of course, in the current moment, you're going to find it in the digital versions of all those things. You're also going to find that instructional text does a lot of different kinds of work. Okay, so what I'm looking at the moment is I'm thinking about these bullet points on the side here. And instructional text does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to creating a learning environment for our students, kind of flavoring that environment in a way. It does a great deal of work around making sure that the structure of the learning experience is clear to students. So in face-to-face live classrooms, you'll have teachers all the time doing things like at the beginning of class saying, okay, folks, so here's what we covered last time. Here's a quick synopsis of where we were. And this is how it links to the thing that we're going to look at today. And today we're going to look at that thing in these 3 big chunks. And we do that all the time when we're teaching face-to-face. And it's incredibly productive in terms of managing student attention, managing expectations, managing cognitive load. And it tends to disappear on people in the digital space. And so we're here to make it explicit and visible today, and hopefully to help you do that for your courses. The other things that instructional texts really do a lot of work in relation to is directing students' attention to specific areas. So letting students know what is absolutely important, what they have to focus on, what is core, what is additional, what order things should happen in. So directing students' actions and behaviors. And as I've already suggested, that idea of creating linkages between different parts of a learning experience. Okay, so your sense of what instructional text is going to emerge to some extent over the course of the first part of this presentation. I want to just be absolutely clear on what instructional text is not. So we're not defining instructional text as the text that carries disciplinary specific content. Instructional text for us, for the purposes of this workshop, and for learning design purposes is all of the stuff that you do, all of the textual work that you do around the disciplinary content to make it more accessible to our students. So we're going to look today very quickly at 3 principles for constructing instructional text. So I'm going to do a little bit of talking, and what we're going to do periodically is we're going to drop out of me talking, and I'm going to ask you to jump in and to either do little activities with me or to share ideas. So what would be really helpful would be if you were in a position to either have to be working on your desktop or laptop, but just to be aware that there are going to be moments coming up where I'm going to say, okay, jump into the text chat and do this, or head off to this document and play with that. Okay, so just be aware that that's coming. So 3 key principles for constructing instructional text. The first thing is that instructional text can work to reduce extraneous processing and to manage essential processing. And we're going to talk about what those terms mean in just a minute. It can also be a space where we connect with our students through our voices, through tone, through the word choices we make. So at that point, for those of us who haven't been in an English high school classroom for many, many decades, voice and tone are the ways that you kind of are read in a text. And there's lots of space there, of course, for miscommunication in a variety of ways. And then finally, another kind of key principle for instructional text, or the third key principle for instructional text that would be useful to take on, is the idea that instructional text needs to happen regularly. It should not be something that we do once and then assume that our students are on board with it and it's all over. For now, instructional text needs to be something that we think about engaging with on a regular basis. Okay, so let's talk through principle 1 a little bit. The first kind of key idea with principle 1, as I said, was to think about reducing extraneous and essential processing in order to leave maximum space for what Mayer calls generative processing. So what's extraneous processing? Extraneous processing is the stuff that students have to do before they can even engage with the ideas we want them to engage with. So finding things online, material that's repeated, material that's unnecessary, material that, or just unfamiliar environments. All of those carry a kind of extraneous processing burden. And as educators, as constructors of those learning spaces, part of our job is to say, how do we reduce that as much as we possibly can in order to leave students with mental space, with cognitive capacity to do the work we really want them to do. The other thing that we really want to reduce is we want to reduce essential processing. And essential processing sounds like something that we shouldn't want to reduce, but it is. And essential processing is specifically items like excessively long texts. I cannot tell you as a humanities graduate how often I was sent a 23-page article where the only important bit was really about 2 pages buried somewhere in the middle. Heartbreaking and unnecessary work. So I would encourage you to think about reducing essential processing around making materials as accessible as possible. So does it have to be this long? Is the language familiar? And so on. We'll chat about that in a moment. And then the goal of all of this is to create as much cognitive capacity, as much space as possible for generative processing, where generative processing is the kind of learning activities that students undertake to really develop. Oh, Katerina is without sound. Please will someone else tell me they can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
We can hear you, thanks.
Thank you so much. That helps. Katerina, I'm so sorry. I think you've had this problem before. Do you mind logging out and logging back in again? Sorry. Okay, so we've got this idea of these different kinds of processing. And generative processing is really the kinds of activities that help people to do the learning that we want them to do. So that's our principle one for instructional text. Our second principle for instructional text draws on the idea of belonging. And that is the idea that when students feel like they belong, their likelihood of success increases. And there is a whole range of research on this. And if we produce online texts, one of the things that online texts tend to do is that they tend to reduce the emotional connection between the writer or the producer of the text and the reader of it. Particularly written texts have that problem. So now we've got a bit of a problem. We want to be able to reduce certain kinds of processing, and then we want to also be able to add connections through voice and tone. Okay, so those are two things that we need to hold on to for the next thing I'm going to ask you to do. So on the screen in front of you at the moment, and I'm going to pop this into present mode, is an email text. Okay, and this is an example of, in some ways, an instructional text. What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to pop into that, or to have a little bit of a look through that, and to identify some element of it that you might want to edit, bearing in mind the two principles we've talked about so far. So the two principles that we've talked about so far was, first of all, the idea of reducing extraneous and unnecessary essential processing. So reduce those things. And then the idea that in creating a sense of belonging, in creating a sense of connection, we can create the best possible conditions for student learning. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment and to read through that email. I'm actually going to take it out of full screen mode in a second. I'm going to ask you to take a moment, have a read through that email, and identify a couple of places where you can either reduce the extraneous processing or edit the text to create a sense of belonging and connection. Tass, may I ask a favor? A copy of this email exists in the assets folder for this webinar.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you could pop that? I don't want to take it out of screen share. Do you think you could pop that link as an editable link into the text chat?
Sure, let me just find it.
Thank you. Sorry, I should have put the link on here. Clearly, that was not a good brain moment. So take 2 minutes and have a little bit of a think about what could you do to either reduce extraneous processing or to create a better sense of belonging and connection.
I popped the link in the chat to Google Docs.
Thank you very, very much. Yeah?
It is editable, so don't feel worried if you edit anything. They can if they want to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so folks, let's take ourselves to that Google Doc for a second. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm actually going to ask you to jump in on that Google Doc and pick a color for your text. So just add a little color so that we know that you're making changes. And feel free to make a couple of changes to this each that you think would build belonging and connection, or that would reduce extraneous processing. And if you do it in color, we'll just be able to see what changes you make. So for anyone who's perhaps making some changes, just grab a little color, a little text color item up there at the big fat A with the underline.
And don't stress too much if you write over each other.
Yeah,
it's the nature of collaboration.
We speak over each other, we write over each other, and we try and make sure that we love each other up as much as possible. Cool.
What does everyone think about the yours sincerely? Do you think that's possibly a little bit formal?
You guys are editing faster than I can keep up. I want to do something and then it's done.
Do you want to just share what you'd like to, what you were thinking of doing?
No, I'm liking what's happening in front of me. It's
I
just
know,
also fast.
It's very quick. It is very quick. It's going very well though. Some lovely person left us a little remove here about the I'll check it from time to time. Could we maybe make that, could we keep the I'll check it part in some way, but maybe adjust it so that students would be clearer on the expectation around when we would check it? So that we didn't have a scenario where our students would be like, I left a message today and she still hasn't got back to me and it's tomorrow. So what are the wonderful things that are going on?
Lots of things. Maybe if you feel comfortable on audio, you can maybe explain a change that you've made or would have liked to make if you didn't get a chance to. Just remember, we are recording, so if you're not too comfortable speaking out loud, you can also type in the chat and we'll read it out.
So let's highlight some of the things that I'm definitely seeing that I really like. So I like figuring out a way to greet my students that I have to say is inspired a little bit by like watching YouTubers. So most YouTubers have like this like standard greeting, like hello lovelies, or hello something something, you know, hello family, or I have the most random YouTubers on my list. So this one lady I watch just greets every time, hello frugal friends. I'm like, okay, it's cute and weird. So hello everyone. If you want to go with hello everyone, that's great. I would sort of encourage maybe moving away from things like dear students. For me, that feels a little bit distancing. But the other thing I just want to say in terms of whatever you do to make your instructional text better, it has to feel real for you. So if you are quite a formal and reserved person, then it does need to still feel authentic to who you are. So don't feel like you have to put on a personality that isn't who you are. I think that's also kind of awkward. So that please use your time wisely. When I wrote this, I was imagining that like scoldy sound, and I really like the version of it's a wonderful opportunity to consolidate what you've learned so far. I did get some weird feedback from my students at one point, which was when they said to me, Shonali, you say things so politely sometimes that we don't know what you want us to do. Which was an interesting observation that I had to come to terms with. And so sometimes we have to be quite direct with our students, and sometimes we can gentle how we're saying things. I really, really liked the making this into 2 bullet points. I think that's really clever. I also like doing things like bolding and certain elements, and you could bold and color, right?
Yeah.
If you wanted to make good links between things. I like the addition to the salutation, is that the right word? I don't know, the kind of closing. So yeah. Instead of yours sincerely, kind regards, or best wishes for the week, or hope you have a good consolidation week, something that feels a little bit more present. Tass, anything else that you really, really love?
No, I think the suggestions are great. I think the break, like, actually we're going to revisit most of these principles later, like chunking the email in a way that it makes it more readable.
Yep.
It's obviously a little bit more friendlier. And I think it's easy for a learner to scan, because that's a technique we use, especially now with like the age of information overload. We need to be able to scan something very quickly and pick out what's important, and then we'll probably read it again after that. Yep. So that's also worth noting. I also wanted to add that sometimes on the personality topic, you know, if you had a prior face-to-face experience with your learners, they may know how you act, and therefore you would say things or do things based on prior connection, which may differ from if you've never ever met them, or you know, if you have lecture videos in your course where they can see you and hear you, that may also impact a little bit how you write in your instructional text.
Yeah, I think that idea of, particularly in the current context, that sense of having a video where they can hear your voice, so that there's some, that they know what it kind of sounds like when you write those emails. Then I think that's a fantastic idea.
That's important, actually, at, you know, when you start a course. So you may not be keen to have, you know, all your videos of your face or voice, but if they have at the beginning of the course like an audio note or a little screencast, that means that every time they read your announcement after that, it's probably going to be in your voice. If they've never heard it, I'm not sure what voice they're reading it in, actually.
That is such a good question. We should ask.
I guess.
Yeah, or like the most grumpy teacher they've ever encountered. Okay, so this activity was really there to just give you an opportunity to think a little bit about what you might play with in terms of reducing extraneous processing and in terms of building connection. I just want to suggest that one of the ways to really to reduce that essential processing element would be, so we're here where it says try 2 short activities, and somebody very cleverly suggested name these. I would name them and then I would hyperlink them as well. So that if I had some lost soul of a student who was trying desperately to catch up, they could just click out from here and go find the things that they needed to find. I don't know if I gave any really good examples in here of spaces where people could do the kind of URL hyperlinking, but hyperlinks are a great way in the online space to help students to navigate things quickly and easily. Okay, so just to like do a little bit of emphasizing around principle 2, I'm going to ask you to jump into the text chat and tell me which of the following options is friendlier for you, option 1 or option 2. And you can just type 1 or 2 into the text chat, into the Zoom text chat. Quick poll, 1 or 2. Okay, it looks like we have an overwhelming win for the ones. Neither, ooh. Katrina, help me out. What's the friendliest version of that? What did you do as the very friendly version? I'm very curious now, help me. So one of the things that we have to think about in the online space and the digital learning space is that text is always tied to visual of some kind. I mean, that's true as well for the face-to-face space. Yeah, no, the zip the lips is a little bit rude, I think, as well. But what happens if in the online space, these comments were paired with icons that looked this way? Does that change your sense of which one is kind of friendlier? Right. So yeah, exactly. So one of the things that we can think about, and we might pop into some slides at the moment or some examples at the moment where you'll be able to see this very clearly. One of the things that we can think about in the ruler space is just making sure that there are actually pictures of us, and they could be, as we've done here, little drawings. And for others, it might be different. So I take the point that putting a smile on a rude comment is, the smiling does kind of compensate for the rudeness a little bit. I think it depends very much on the nature of the interaction, right? These are obviously simplifications. The zip the lips thing, and I particularly left the grade 10 in there because it's a thing that I think in schools teachers might do and might be kind of fairly light-hearted about. I can't imagine it doing it in a university context, but it's a good example of how sometimes you can end up with mixed messaging, or sometimes inconsistent messaging, or finding a way to make sure that your visuals and your text, your written text, with spoken text align in a way that amplifies the message rather than confuses it. Okay, so I'm going to move on a teeny bit. Principle 3 is the idea of communicating regularly, and we just have a couple of offerings here we'd like to share. The first thing is to think about offering instructional text in brief, just-in-time chunks. So if your instructional text relates to, for example, the big assignments that your students are going to be doing in a particular context, then what I would like to suggest you do is mention them once at the beginning of semester so that people know that there's a big assignment coming up, but then consider revisiting that idea at various points. So I would strongly like to argue for a kind of a cyclical return to certain kinds of instructions, including things like instructional text around creating classroom contexts and classroom environments. In terms of instructional texts, in terms of communication, I'm a big fan of twice weekly emails. So something to kick the week off and something to nudge people into continuing with the week's activities. I see these as an opportunity to build a connection with your learners over time and to acknowledge and encourage specific learners' efforts on an ongoing basis. That would be doing things like, oh, there's a really nice conversation happening in this forum with this person and this person, go have a look. The trick is to make sure that it's a different group of learners every time that you acknowledge and encourage. You might also check with your learners upfront whether they like to be named or whether that's a hopelessly embarrassing thing and they really don't want that. Yeah, so communicate regularly. And then Tass, I believe at this point I'm handing to you.
Yes, so I will start sharing. You're welcome to check in anyone in the interim.
In the meanwhile, folks, any comments, any questions, please feel free to continue in the text chat and I will respond there.
Just 1 second, I'm just,
sure.
Where's my chat?
Why does the chat always go places to hide?
Okay, I got it back.
Well
okay,
done.
Hi everyone. I'll present it from now till the end of the session. So for this slide, I want to put yourselves, you can see here. Cool. For the slide that you see on screen, you are the student in this situation and you are in week 4 of your course. It's on plagiarism and you see 2 videos and 2 links at the bottom. If you were the learner, how would you feel about seeing this page? Maybe just pop in the chat or you can say it out loud. Do you feel that it's well designed? Do you feel like you know what to do? Do you feel a little bit confused? Cool. So in the chat, must I watch both videos? What do I do first? We need more instructions. There's no clear instruction. Confused. Depending on the year, if it's a first-year student, they may be quite confused. It could be useful to have it labeled. Too much information and reading small font. Lots of really good points. Yeah, so if we just popped 2 videos and 2 links, people might be confused. They don't know what to do. They don't know what they meant to focus on in the video. There's 2 links at the bottom. What are they linking to? Are they readings? Are they videos? Are they articles? So there's not quite good instruction for this page. If we go to the next slide, this is how it looks in reality. So when week 4 started, as Shanali said, we sent an email for week 4 telling learners what they would do in the week. So in that email, there'll be quite a lot of instruction about what's upcoming for the entire week. On the right-hand screenshot, this is the page with some instructions. So it has some introductory text. It has information about the video. Before you watch the video, give some information about the estimated time, etc. So this brings us to placement of instructional text. It's sort of everywhere. If we think about an online course, you might have instruction in your course outline. You may have instruction, if a module starts or a week starts, you might send an email at the beginning of every week. And Shanali suggested 2 emails per week, and that would include some instruction. On your actual lesson page or your content page, you'll have instruction at the beginning of the page, you'll have instructions associated with the different learning materials, so your videos, your readings, for assignments, and then at the end of the week, you may have some more. So the extent of which you do either of these will differ. So to be more specific, you can think about instructional texts as introductory, linking, and concluding instructional texts. So the way we typically design pages is if you go to a lesson page, you will see a little, in this case, a little laptop introducing you to the week. It's personalized and has your name and gives you just a quick introduction to the session. And then after that, you'll have a little bit of a detail about what you'll do for the week, giving learners an idea of what they will cover before they get into anything. This is another example of this type of introductory text. So it has some learning outcomes, and then in the second part of the image, it has key information. So what are the dates for the week? How many hours? What are the main activities? And what are the assessments? And this could easily have been added to that page I showed you on plagiarism. Then we have instructional text to support navigation. So it's a bit detailed, but if you look at the top of the first arrow, it says you can do one of two things here, indicating to learners that you have an option and they need to decide. You have in bullet point 1 or point 1, it says to watch, click on the play symbol, telling learners how they need to do it. And this is especially important if you are introducing a new tool or new type of activity they've never done before, then that first time instruction is so much more important. So this page contains some examples of that, like when you're watching something, you can find the link below this instruction, etc. Then we have learning activity instructional text, and this is similar to the one before, but when they have to do an activity, giving information about the time allocation, a summary of what the activity is, and the steps they have to take to complete the activity if that suits the assessment or assignment. Then the last one is the email as instructional text, which we covered and which you nicely edited beforehand. And I'm sure if you see this email, you may want to tweak some of the information as well. So in this email, we have a pretty little header. We have in the first line, it says, firstly, thank you for all your enthusiasm and participation in last week's learning and activities. That's acknowledging students' contribution, a little bit of a summary, some key information, which is repeated from the platform. So learners see it once on Monday morning at 8 or 9 a.m. and they see it again in the week. So actually sometimes repetition of essential information can be useful. Does anyone have any questions or points at this point? I think we could. Cool. Okay, so now I want to go into the visual design of instructional text, which actually many of you picked up in the email you edited earlier by using bolding text, chunking information, which is really important. So for the visual design of instructional text, these are some of the things we can think of, but not all. So we can think about headings, numbering, using bullets, the spacing of our text, the fonts that we use, how we emphasize our text, and colors and highlighting. If you want to read more about creating accessible course design and materials, you can read our guide on universal design for learning, which is a little bit more broad, but useful when you're thinking about accessibility of your course text. So first up, we have content structure using headings and numbering. So if you think about a textbook, when you open any textbook that you might have actually in front of you, it typically has division for chapters. It has under chapters will have sub-chapters or topics with numbers associated with it. And when you're doing an online course or blended course, emulating this in your course design is really useful. It allows learners to know where they are at any point. They know they're at 2.3 on this topic, versus if you had everything with no chapter numbers or sub-numbering, it can get a little bit confusing. So what this does is it improves scannability of a document. It improves the navigation. It helps students sequence and organize information. and it provides opportunities for signaling. So often when I've used numbering, students will say, I'm having an issue with 4.3. So it's quite specific about where the issue is, which is useful. This is just a real life example or examples. On the left-hand side is the planning for how we're going to do the headings and numbering. On the right-hand side is a real life screenshot from a course that you saw earlier. So week 4, we know that it's on the chapter writing from the evidence, and within that we have 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, and 4.4. So it's easy to see how the divisions are made. Okay, so moving on to bullets. So this is a paragraph with quite a few points. There's 5 key tips within this paragraph, which is not easily to see at all. But once we add bullet points, it's quite easy to see and scan what these 5 points are. So when you are looking at your text, when there is an opportunity or possibility to divide it into bullet points, it's a really good option, like we did in the email earlier. So bullets are great for conveying information. Spacing. These are 2 paragraphs which maybe don't look that bad, you know, but it could use some work. Maybe there are some words that can be made bold, and maybe there is an opportunity to use bullet points. So on the next slide, this is an example of how it actually looks. And we've made separate paragraphs, we've made bullet points, and we've made some key terms bold. And if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see like this random sort of shapes, gray shapes. And what this does is it shows you how people actually interpret the screenshot on the left with the text. In your mind, you've seen a certain number of chunks. So for the first paragraph, which is quite big, that will be classified as 1 chunk. And then the next paragraph will be classified as another chunk. And it's a really good way for students or for any of us to absorb information versus having one really big chunk of information. Spacing. And then let's move to fonts. So let's get a little bit interactive here. I have 5 fonts on screen, options A to E. Which of the following fonts is most readable to you? You can just pop a letter in the chat. Okay, we seem to all be on the exact same page. Option C, which is Arial. Option B is Times New Roman. Option A is Comic Sans, which some people like too. Yeah, so fonts can really impact the readability of the text. Sometimes we really want to change things up by using different fonts, but actually there are better fonts to use than others. So you may want to consider using a font that has high readability, like Arial, Vandana, Century Gothic, Calibri, and Tahoma. Times New Roman is also fine. And then fonts can also convey tone. Which of these do you think are more serious? Why do you think option A doesn't seem serious? What about it? Oh, we have one for A. Font is not serious. Yeah, so someone said it looks a little bit fun. We have a comment that it's all in the name, Comic Sans. Yeah, it is a font that's typically considered more fun and playful. When you're talking about something like penalties or something serious, maybe a playful font doesn't quite suit the nature of the text. So when we think about font, we can think about readability, but also tone. Font size. Let's look at the one on the left. Which size is most readable to you, as you can see on your screen? Obviously, we have to take into account that people are viewing this on different size screens. But let's see, on the Arial side on the left, which font size is most readable to you? Not most readable, that would be obviously the biggest one. But like, how do I say this? Should I help out you? Which would be most acceptable, the smallest font that would be most acceptable?
Like legible, maybe.
Yeah, legible. 12, 14, Arial 24. Yeah, so the minimum font that is most legible, minimum size font. You can just pop in the chat the number 12, 14, 10. Like using 12 for text with bigger headings, yeah? Yeah, so you could have possibly your body font may be 12 and your headings could be 14 or 18, depending on how you do your headings and subheadings. So font size is quite important. It is a bit more difficult given that people use different devices, but generally for body text, you wouldn't go anything less than 12 for body text. And you also have to be mindful that depending on the font you use, some fonts are naturally smaller. So 12 in Arial may not be equivalent to 12 in another font. So you always want to just pay attention to the readability based on the font as well. Yeah, so it seems that most people are fine with 12 or 14. Yeah. So then the next thing we want to come to is the emphasis of using text effects. So if you want to bring attention to something specific in a paragraph, you may want to bold your text, underline your text, or italicize certain parts of your text. You may also want to use color. So in the section I have a red bold font. But in order to keep in mind that some people may be colorblind, when you use color, it's always important to actually also use like an effect like a bold or an underline so that people can see that even if they may have issues with viewing certain colors. And once you start using these things, so possibly you may use bold for deadlines in your weekly announcements. And what you might want to do is continue using bold throughout your course. So you've almost developed a style for your course in how you use text. Then this is just a slide where you have to think about using colors. How do you feel about that red and blue text? Can you read it easily? Is it an issue? Just pop in the chat. Awful. We have awful coloring. Yes, indeed. Difficult. Red is rude. No to red. Definitely. The colors we use can be quite hard to read depending on what we use. So for example, reading this blue on red is such an eyesore. If you ever feel unsure about the colors you're using to highlight, you can actually use an online tool. You'd Google like contrast checker for colors, and you would use the two colors that you're using just to make sure that it is quite accessible to read. And I think that's actually it. So we're on our conclusion. So instructional text is an important link between you and your students. It gives you a chance to display your the instruction and also your personality. It guides students' learning in an effective way, and it adds you to the learning, the point I made about personality. Like Shrinali said earlier, this is based on a chapter we wrote, and it covers all the same information. So if you do want to read it, there'll be a link in the slides. Shrinali, would you like to add anything?
I was just about to ask in the text chat if anyone had any comments or questions that they would like to share either by text or verbally. Just to see if anyone's got any questions or queries for us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to know how would this impact your instructional text going forward based on what we covered today?
I mean, we have a bit of a standing kind of joke that particularly when you take on board some of the viewability, legibility materials, sometimes it reduces like your color pool, for example, to often quite a limited range. And sometimes institutions will have preferred color palettes that don't sit so nicely with the kind of contrast checking and the legibility data and so on. So I think sometimes we have to kind of make the best of a situation. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There are institutions that might limit you. But I guess often when they do have their styles, hopefully they've made all these considerations around color and font size and the types of fonts already for you.
Yeah. Okay. It doesn't idea of creating consistency. So yes, I think, Nikki, one of the things that's really useful is for a course, for example, to sit down and create a style sheet. I know this sounds like terribly like publishing, graphics designy kind of vibes, but having a style sheet at the beginning of your course so that you can create the elements for what do headers look like, what do subheadings look like, what do assignments look like, just so that you can then, it becomes a kind of easy, familiar set of signposting. None of us has to think twice about what to do at a stop street.
Yeah.
You know, like you see that sign, you stop, that's it. That's how it works. We want our students, for example, to see an important ideas flag and go, whoa, I have to pay attention to that. So for me, doing that in advance feels like a little bit of admin at the beginning, but it can streamline it. And particularly if you have multiple colleagues working on a course, I think it's quite distracting for students to feel like, you know, Shinali loves pink and Tasneem loves purple. And now this page is pink coded and that page is purple coded and something else has green and orange. And so it does help, I think, if it can kind of help consolidate the sense of we are in a communal experience through some quite subtle use of color. Okay, change between what could be said in person and what can be written is vast. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Hi, Shinali. You
Hi.
see, I've noticed since we started kind of working online is how almost we became so prescriptive in how things, to the point that I am teaching, for example, third years and masters and honors students, and the way that the online platforms have changed our engagement, almost like, you know, people who never had to be told how to interact with text in the same way that like a first year would be told. And this kind of regression worries me, even as I am very aware of some of the key things that you've highlighted here. And I'm kind of battling with like allowing myself to be so prescriptive in learning parts and all of these things that I've been trying to do since March last year. And now also thinking, I think this is actually taking away people's agency. People don't even know how to look for papers now because everything is just so given and neatly packaged. It's worrying me.
So I totally agree with you, and I think that there are a couple of things that we can consciously build into our design to mitigate those kinds of risks. And the first one I want to suggest is the idea of reduced scaffolding. So that's a very real concept in the educational literature, where at the beginning of a process, you offer lots of scaffolding. So at the beginning of an honors course, for example, the first 2 weeks, there'd be lots of flagging for this is here, that's there, go find this thing in this particular place. And then over the course of the semester, you gradually reduce that, because what you're expecting is that students would reasonably now know how to do a particular activity. So that's the one concept, reduce scaffolding. The other concept for me, and I think that this is kind of partly all of our experiences of online learning have been shaped substantially by the emergency remote teaching process and the constraints around things like data and the constraints around students being off campus and therefore not able to access us. And so what we've done is we've created the safest possible learning design that we could under those circumstances. And some of that, for some lecturers, has meant going off and finding a whole bunch of readings for their students and making those available. And again, I would think about that in terms of essential skills and reduced scaffolding. I believe that particularly for a postgraduate humanities student, the capacity to identify learning material, to identify research of your own is actually a core skill. And we shouldn't be doing that. we might want to make a couple of suggestions. So we might want to say to our students, here are a couple of key readings to start off with. Go away and supplement those using the following databases. Or if we want to reduce the scaffolding even further, go to the library site and have a look at what databases are available to you, use those. Or I prefer to use Google, or prefer whatever the preference for the discipline is. So I think we need to think about, I think we should not make the mistake of conflating generative processing, work that helps build our student skills, with stuff that gets in the way of them doing the stuff we really care about. And sometimes that means making explicit the things that we care about that have been tacit and hidden in our curricula for millennia now. Well, not millennia, but decades. So, and making that out, make that absolutely explicit for our students. But I do take your point that in the current context, a lot of what we've done is made online learning as safe as possible for students. Yeah. Cass, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, completely. Like you got it all. I was just thinking of a course we designed recently. In the 1 week we had, lots of information about how you log on to Easy Proxy and access all the databases. And for the assignment, like a little mini assignment that week, we gave all the direct links to the articles. And in the next week, we didn't give them any links. We're like, you go find it now that you've learned. But I know there is a little bit of tension between like ERT and giving people things because of data, and not doing that. But I think we have to reflect whether it's actually a core skill. And if it is, then yeah, we can do that reduced scaffolding approach. Is that helpful?
Very helpful. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on it.
Don't feel bad to slowly withdraw support, particularly with postgraduates. I mean, a postgraduate who cannot find their own readings is a very sad and hamstrung person, and we must help them by making them a little uncomfortable at some point.
Definitely.
Okay, folks, any other comments or questions or things that bother you? I think one of the things we took out of this presentation, just because of time, that's in the book chapter, is the idea of different kinds of presences. And one of the things that instructional text for me does is it's really an opportunity for you to insert your presence into a digital and textual space where otherwise you might be missing. And I would grab onto it as an opportunity to do that. Okay, all right, colleagues. I think we should wrap at that point.
Yeah.
Cass, lovely working with you. Miss having you
too.
around. Folks, thank you all very much for joining us. I hope that some of this finds resonance in your work and that you are able to make use of it. Just a little reminder, in the slides, there is, and actually let's just pop a link to the slides in for you immediately. In the slides, there is a link to the various SILT resources. What we would encourage you to do is please feel free to simply pop onto the website and investigate some of the resources that are available to you, including things like one-on-one consultations for UCT staff and tutors. At this point, we're not offering one-on-one consultations to colleagues from other institutions, unfortunately, but the resources that are there are all available to you. So good luck. Feel free to get hold of us in different spaces for a little bit more support and help. Cass is doing such a great job of marketing this chapter in the background. But otherwise, folks, thank you so much. We will close the room shortly. And thank you for your lovely participation in the background.